It is my pleasure to welcome Professor Pasi Sahlberg to this second professionally speaking event co-hosted by the Swansea University School of Education and the EWC. In many ways, Pasi is hard to introduce. Firstly, he's a long-standing friend and colleague, and secondly, he's so well known internationally as a researcher, a policymaker, a practitioner, that it's hard to know what to say. Most of us know Pasi's work and writing about Finland and its high-performing education system. Also, Pasi continues to advise governments around the world, including Scotland, where we're both international advisors. Pasi is someone who is not afraid to speak truth to power. He focuses on key issues like play, like technology, that he believes is professionally important and needs to be widely shared. Pasi is a truly global educator, moving from Finland to Harvard, and most recently to the University of New South Wales in Australia. If I might borrow the words of the Vice President of the United States of America, we know this is the first visit to Wales, Pasi, but it certainly won't be the last. Croeso Cymru, welcome to Wales.
Thank you very much, Alma. Diolch yn fawr. Pasi Sahlberg, we're very, very grateful to you for joining us live from Australia at this very early hour for you. And we're looking forward very much to hearing what you have to say on a topic which has never had more importance than now. Growing up digital. Over to you. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Alma, for your introduction. I must say that it was very easy to accept this invitation to speak in this this event today. Obviously, we all would have been happier to meet in person somewhere there in Wales and have a conversation. I don't know about you, but I really miss these in-person meetings and conferences and seminars and others. So it would be nice to do that. But I guess that this is the thing we can do. As you heard, I'm also in a way in Wales. I'm in New South Wales, Australia, and as we always do say here in occasions like this, I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land. Where I am in Kensington, Sydney area. This was and always will be a Gadigal land. Yesterday there was an Australia Day, and every year Australia Day is a kind of a controversial day because it's in a way celebrates the birth of the white Australia, and there are many people, increasing number of people who understand that it doesn't fully recognize the true nature of this country. So anyway, I'm talking to you from here, and I'll try to do my best in this short moment that we have together. And this is also an invitation for you to join this conversation and share your contributions and views about this thing that I think should be a very topical thing. At least it is here and in many other countries, where we are looking at how the digital media and technologies shape the lives and future and learning of our youngest people. I understand that most children in Wales are learning from home, which means that most of them actually spend more time than they used to with the digital screens and their gadgets, hopefully learning things and communicating with their teachers and one another. But there are also signs here and around the world really that this is becoming to be a kind of a new normal in many young people's lives, that the technology is really taking even bigger part of their lives. So I speak a little bit about this, and up front I want to emphasize that I don't have a kind of a clear single solution for you or for us or anybody else what to do exactly. But my point really here is that by providing hopefully a little bit new insight in what is going on, in our schools and at homes, that we together can figure out, what do we need to do? And my argument is that we have to do something if this data and the research that I'm talking about, and not only research that we are doing here, but many others, is pointing to the right issue. So sit back and fasten your seatbelts for a moment. I try to keep this kind of a compact and clear and relatively short. I understand that the kind of attention span with the Zoom meetings like this or webinars is not that long. So let's go. I invite you into this, and I will share with you some slides. So you're going to see, hopefully, these bilingual slides to make sure that everybody feels comfortable and included in this thing. So the title of this presentation, my talk this evening to you, is titled "Growing Up Digital: How Technology Shapes the Lives and Learning of Our Children." And I'm really not specifically looking at Australia or Wales or Finland or any other place. This is a kind of a global introduction. I must say, though, that many of these things that we will be talking about this evening are emerging things. So there's a new evidence coming as we speak, and many of these things are also shaping their form, so that we need to kind of follow up all the time what is going on. So you can have the slide deck right after the presentation, so you can return back to this information or the slides if you wish, and you can use this material in your schools or in your communities or yourself as you wish. Okay, let's move on. I'll make sure that I can. So this is my plan this evening for you. I'm basically have divided this in the 4 sections of my talk. I want to start with some of the global trends, and I'm sure that many of you have been thinking about what is happening, what is going on in the world. I'm going to give you kind of a very big picture and very quickly about education. What are we talking about? Mostly because there have been a lot of thinking and talking about how this pandemic and COVID is disrupting education, and that we need to reimagine or redesign schools and learning. Just to remind people that we have some current trends and issues that we need to keep in mind, that they have not disappeared because of the pandemic, because of this new situation. Quite the opposite, that many of them have been just amplified and become more obvious. Then I want to be very clear about this. What is the big question? What is the kind of a key question that we are asking? And we should continue to ask and also research and look at in the schools. If you work in a school, this is one of those big things that we need to be aware of. And then some emerging answers from our research and research from colleagues and other people. And then we can end with this. The most important question is that what can we do about this thing? So be ready. Let's begin with this global trend. So I'm just going to show you 3 things that I have seen that I think it doesn't really matter what you do in education, or even if you're not in education and you're listening to this webinar, there are some of these things you may find important and probably surprising as well. The first one of them, of course, is regarding student learning. Many people have been asking now that so how do the children around the world in different countries, how they're going, how they're learning, performing compared to 10 or 20 years ago. And this is what the OECD is saying. Of course, the OECD includes the 37 the most developed nations, the rich, the wealthier part of the world, if you wish. And what the OECD is showing is that we have actually witnessed a declining trend over the 20 years. Certainly, there's no room to say that students learning in literacies, mathematics and science that often reflect the overall learning in school, the kind of a school type of learning, has not gone any better. this is my conclusion and takeaway from the database of the OECD, that there has actually been a slight declining trend when it comes to overall students learning over the time of the OECD PISA study, that is 20 years. Now, this alone would be something that we could kind of explain and argue what's going on there. But at the same time, and this is again a data from the OECD's own database, that is basically the only source of internationally comparable evidence in these issues, that at the same time during the 15-20 years, the money that goes into educating these people, same kids, has increased about 15% according to some estimates. And this, of course, for anybody, if you're an educator or journalist or just a taxpayer, is a hard question. So how can it be that we spend more money than before and we get less out of it as student learning outcomes? And we don't know exactly why this is, and this obviously varies from place to place at different countries. This is exactly the image here in Australia. This seems to be the case also in places like Finland, for example, and many other OECD countries. And we do not know exactly what it is. No, make no mistake, there are schools and certainly there are countries, and Wales may be one of them, where this trend of higher cost and lower outcomes is not so kind of radically clear that it is here. But overall, I'm looking at the big picture. So I'm not looking at any particular country itself. So this is trend number one, and we have to keep on asking questions that how do we try to improve education? Is the money going to the right places? Are we trying to do right things? And what are those things that are driving this declining student performance? Here is one of these candidates, and I'm not arguing that this would be connected, but this is my global trend number two around the world, and now during the pandemic, probably more clearly than before, the students' well-being and health, particularly mental health, has been declining. And here are some of the things that you can see here in Australia, in Finland, and UK, and North America, and many other places, that some of these symptoms of the students' well-being have become fairly kind of difficult to accept and difficult to deal with in our societies. But particularly the fact that the kids are not sleeping as they used to. The quality and quantity of sleep has been declining in most countries around the world. And at the same time, that we can see that the time that the kids spend in a kind of inactive things during the day, including the screen time and online work, sitting down, doing exactly what I'm doing right now with you, staring at the screen and sitting down, not moving, has rapidly increased. And again, even within this trend, it's difficult to say whether there's a directional association between these two things, or whether this particular trend would be linked somehow to the earlier trend that I showed you. We simply don't know. But it's an important question now to look at how these different variables that we can see are linked to one another. I'm quite sure that in the UK and Wales, particularly, this is something that many parents and many teachers have seen, and it's an important thing to be included in these conversations that we have about improving schools and trying to improve the learning of our youngest ones. So the last and the third global trend that I want to include here before I go into the very topic of this webinar is that we have so many more young children growing up with their digital gadgets and devices that they have at home, and now increasingly also related to the school. Like, for example, here in Australia, and I leave your local data there to be shared and talked about, those who know it much better than I do. But here in Australia, children spend about 11 hours each day sitting down, so doing what I'm doing here, and about half of the time in front of the screens. And remember that this was before the pandemic, and now there's some data here in Australia is claiming that the time that children spend on screens and their digital gadgets in some cases has doubled from what it was. And some of the striking statistics there are, as you can see, that one third of preschoolers here, and when we say preschoolers here, we mean very early, very young children, those before they go to kindergarten and school. So basically from year 1 to 5. So 1/3 of the preschoolers have a screen-based device. 2/3 of primary school children have a smartphone, and practically everybody older than that, the children carry a smartphone with them all the time. So this is, of course, something that is, it has become an issue, and there has been, interestingly, during the last couple of weeks, a growing number of newspaper articles and documentaries about what is happening. This New York Times, and I really invite you to take a look at this if you feel that they want to see what is happening elsewhere. The New York Times story a couple of weeks ago about the screen time was a really alarming thing, what's happening in many families. And The Guardian recently, last week, ran a story that is about the concerns how the children's health is at risk when the screen times have been in increase. And so I'm not sure whether there's a similar issues going over there, but this is a kind of a constant area of conversation and concern among many parents, many teachers, and interestingly young people as well. So now let me move to the real question here. That is really the big question, and I truly hope that you understand correctly what I'm saying. I'm not arguing here at all that there would be a causational relationship between the children's increasing use of digital media and technologies or screen time and these issues with well-being, health, identity, or student learning that you saw in these trends earlier. This is a big issue because we don't yet know exactly how this relationship works. So we don't know which way this causation or direction of this association operates in this question. That's why it's a big question. And I understand as well as many of you do that the research is not at all clear about what is happening here. So let's look at some of the signs from the research. If you want to, as an educator, you have a responsibility to ask that what do we know from research currently about these things. So I'll show you just some of these things, and there's a lot of research going on as we speak about these similar and same questions. So I can only show you some things over here. Now, of course, the OECD, that is one source of data, internationally comparable data, is an interesting way to look at this because we can compare situations in different countries. So what you see here is the OECD, fairly recent OECD data about the children's mental well-being and health as a function of screen time. And interestingly, what the OECD data shows that there's a kind of a benefit from screens and technology for young people regarding their mental well-being and health until the kind of some point of amount of hours during each day. So it's about an hour or two that does good things for the kids' mental health. But after that, the function begins to work against the mental health, and there's a kind of a decline when the digital engagement increases every day, as you see in this screen. So there's nothing new here. We knew this already, that little bit of devices and whether it's a gaming or social media or learning through or reading with the gadgets is okay, but when it comes to kind of a habits daily, then we have an issue. But then we have these researchers who are looking at this particular question that is there or could there be a directional association between the increased screen time or engagement with the digital gadgets and some of these negative outcomes? That's much more complicated issue. Probably one of the most well-known researcher and scholar in this field globally is Jean Twenge from San Diego University. And so she wrote a few years ago a very well-known book called iGen, where she's looking at all kinds of variables and indicators about what is happening in young people's lives, mostly in the United States, using a huge amount of data. And her argument in the book and much of the research, like this article published a couple of years ago, is that when we are looking at the high users, those young people who are spending hours and hours, more than 3 hours a day, systematically with the digital media and technologies, that they often show less curiosity, self-control, and emotional stability. So in other words, Twenge is one of those scholars that is trying to establish this causational connection between those two things. But it's not at all clear thing. You are probably well aware over there about the study that was done in Oxford University about, I guess, about a year and a half ago, that received a lot of media space and time in the UK and around the world, really, that basically say that the screen time for young people is no more harmful than, eating potatoes or basically anything else. And so these types of studies and articles are trying to challenge this directional association between the screen time and mental well-being, health. This Jean Twenge's article that you see there on the right, that have smartphones destroyed the generation, is based on her work, this earlier work. This was published in the Atlantic magazine a few years ago, and is a highly read, but also highly controversial in terms of this very basic argument that she's making. So then there are some studies emerging. There's this Canadian study that the authors claim that is a first scientific study that is able to show that there is a directional association between children's, in this case, very young children's screen time and poor performance in development screening tests. I'm sure that there will be many studies like this emerging on the way as the science develops in this field, but there will be also many studies that is about to show that this is not necessarily the case. Again, the OECD is having some other interesting information, and this just for the sake of curiosity here to show how the situation regarding feeling bad if not connected to the internet varies from country to country within the OECD and beyond. Actually, this comes from the OECD's PISA database. But this shows us that whether it's about boys or girls, most young boys and girls, we are looking at the 15 years old here, so this is the kind of a PISA age, they feel somehow bad if they are not connected to the internet during the day. And this is a new thing, and this of course tells a lot about what is going on in the young people's lives. And there's a huge kind of a range of young people feeling differently about this. If you look at the Sweden, France, Chinese Taipei, and then Slovenia, Estonia, Germany, Iceland on the other side, that this is still the situation is not the similar globally overall, but it's a huge thing. So let me stop here. This basically this background, and now get into what we are doing here at the University of New South Wales. The research that I'm engaged now is called Growing Up Digital Australia. That is part of the larger international study that I'm going to talk about a little bit. So I'm going to share you some of the first findings that we have, just for you to establish an idea what might be going on among young people, and also think about what do you think is happening in your communities, or your schools and families there in Wales. So I started to work and lead this project here 2.5 years ago. It's called Growing Up Digital Australia. And as a first thing, during the design of the study, we run a pre-poll, national poll here, including about 2,000 parents and adults here. So this is not yet about teachers, just to get the kind of idea of what is this sentiment, what is the feeling among Australian adults and parents. And so when we asked them about the smartphones and social media, this is what we got out of this poll, that almost everybody, 92% of Australian adults, most of them parents obviously, thought about a year ago, just before we went into this pandemic, that smartphones and social media have reduced the time that kids have for daily physical activity and, more importantly, for play. And 3/4 of parents think or thought that time that social media is a distraction in a family life of their children. So we had many other questions, of course, in this poll, but this kind of indicated that there is an issue that we need to research, and there was not that type of data, and still isn't in this country available. So the Growing Up Digital study that was started about 6 years ago in the United States. That was the time when I was a visiting professor at Harvard University, and I had a privilege to get to know people from Harvard Medical School and the School of Public Health over there. And there were some people who were working on this kind of early study of growing up that was called, and still is called, Growing Up Digital, with the Canadian partners in Alberta, is the Alberta Teachers Association. And the idea of this study is to, not just run surveys on parents or educators, teachers in the schools about this, but this is a kind of a longer study. So the range that we have here is about 10 years, and we are looking at the possible health, well-being, and learning outcomes of children's use of digital media and technology over time. And there are 3 phases here, and I'm mostly going to talk about the phase 1 because this is something that has been completed here and in Canada as well. So this phase 1 is providing a teacher and principal, kind of a school perspective on these things. So we are talking and running surveys on classroom teachers and school principals, asking questions, what do they see in their own schools when they look at the young people, particularly when they compare what they see today in the classrooms compared to 3 to 5 years ago. So it's a fairly short historical perspective here. Then the phase 1 that we have just completed here in Australia is the parent and grandparent perspective on the same thing. So we are asking the similar types of things and interviewing parents and grandparents at homes, what is going on there, how the relationships and behaviors at home have changed, or what they look like right now. And then the third one that will come later this year, the phase 3, we look at the young children's, their own perspectives, and we have a particular methodology to do that. So we are using the digital devices, the smartphones, where they kind of collect information and pictures and images about the situations where they are in a random moments during the time. So this is a kind of a study that we are now working on here in Australia, and this has been completed the similar way in Alberta as well. And it is a partner study with the Center on Media and Child Health in the United States at Harvard University. The Alberta Teachers Association is a Canadian partner, and then the UNSW's Gonski Institute, where I work, is running this study here. So let me share you some kind of first outcomes of the phase 1 here that I hope you find interesting. So we had about 2,000 teachers and educators here. You see the kind of a profile of those who attended this phase 1 survey nationally. So it's not just in New South Wales, it covers all the states and territories here in Australia. Half of them were teachers, 1/3 school principals, and then rest admin staff and others who work in the school. And this fairly well represents the kind of overall school setting here in Australia, having about 1/4 of remote and rural schools included in this. So the survey was an online survey, ranging questions about how the educators, teachers, and principals see the kids, how they see themselves, what is happening in the school, and many other things. This is one of those questions from the survey. If I was there or if we were in the same, sharing the same room, I would obviously run some of these questions with you so that we could see what's going on. So this is one of those questions about the extent to which the digital technologies enhance or detract from teaching and learning in school from the teacher's perspective. And of course, like always in the surveys, the questions are sometimes difficult to answer, but this is just an example of what we're asking. So now here you see, and I'm going to run some of these outcomes and results with you. Obviously, many teachers and educators see that the technology can enhance the teaching and learning activities in the school. It's an obvious thing. The purpose of this study is not to show that technology is a kind of a negative thing. And it's very clear in our research and the Canadian study as well, that many teachers find technology a great tool. But of course, if it's a 43% who believe that digital technologies enhance teaching and learning activities, there's room for all kinds of other views as well. Almost 70% of teachers thought that particularly the inquiry-based, the kind of active learning-based things benefit from having technology and communication technologies as part of the teaching and learning over there. We also asked teachers, give us examples of how technology is a tool, how it's benefiting things. Here you can see some of those obvious things that if you're a teacher listening to this presentation, you probably have a long list of things that kids can benefit, ranging from running student podcast, using it for group learning, recording your own activities when you're learning or when you're teaching something, and you name it. So there's no kind of a shortage of positive things and good things that comes with the digital media and technologies. But then it's also a growing distraction. And this became very, very clear in this study. It's just like in a Canadian study that you will see in a minute. 84% of teachers and principals here in Australia believe that digital technologies are a growing distraction. And this is a huge number. Here you can see some of the terms that teachers and principals used when they were describing what is happening during this distraction. What does it look like in a school? Some of the other findings, like 78% of teachers say that students' abilities to focus, stay on task has decreased. The same number out of 5 teachers say that the students' level of empathy has declined, and also the physical activity and play is becoming more rare in schools and outside of the schools, according to the teachers here. This is probably our main kind of a concern and surprising finding here, is that we title that Australian classrooms are becoming more complex places to teach and learn. Excuse me. This must be the similar thing in Wales and around the world as well. But if you look at these numbers, we were asking teachers to compare what they see in their classrooms now. And remember that this was just before the pandemic, basically November, December last 2019. And this is what the teachers told us, that more than 90% of teachers said that the emotional challenges, social challenges, and behavioral challenges in their own classrooms and schools have increased compared to 3 to 5 years ago. And 84% said that the cognitive challenges have increased. So overall, we can say that if this research is right, and we have no reason to doubt why teachers wouldn't be able to say the correct things here, is that the situation regarding teaching and learning in Australian schools is very different than it was 5 or 10 years ago, particularly because of these issues that children seem to be bringing to classroom every day. The conclusion here was, based on some of these answers that teachers were providing us, that almost 60% of teachers here, almost 60% said that there has been a decline in students' overall readiness to learn. And of course, if you look at this data now and you go to some of these early trends that I showed you, this invites a kind of a question that is this declined readiness to learn somehow linked to declining performance, learning in school overall, or increased issues with mental health that we saw earlier. That is still going back to this big question earlier. But then we also ask about how digital technologies are affecting teachers and principals themselves. It's very clear if you look at the some data here. 2 in 3 teachers say that technology is a growing distraction in their own lives as well. And we don't know at all what is happening now during the pandemic and remote learning things. But this is particularly issue among younger teachers, as you can see here. 1/4 of these younger teachers thought that they were, one quarter of the teachers felt that they are addicted, kind of have addiction-like relationship with the technology, and that was a particular issue with the younger teachers. So there's something we need to probably stop and think again what we are doing and what to do with this issue. It may be that some of these inconvenient findings will during the course of the time go away or be less of an issue, but we need to be aware of these things. And now for all of those there who, if you're asking that, so how does Australia and Canada compare to one another, being a fairly similar places in many ways, here is just a kind of a nugget of the Alberta data that was collected a little bit earlier. So there's a 3-year gap between Alberta and Australia, but all these findings about these challenges that the children bring to schools with them every day that you heard earlier here in Australia are very similar in Alberta. And my research colleagues are wondering that if the Albertan data was collected at the same time that we did here in Australia, that these percentages that you see here would be even closer to one another. So this of course doesn't fully qualify the reliability of this type of research and data, but it's a kind of an interesting thing that we can see so many similarities across these 2 different continents and 2 different systems regarding the teachers' perceptions of the young people. So finally, let me come to the finish line, close to the finish line here. And the question is that what can we do? And this, of course, I know that many of you are asking me now that, so what do you think we should be doing? What is the solution to this? And as I said earlier, that there's no single simple solution to this complex issue. And this is what we need to understand. And particularly when it comes to digital media and technologies, young people are very different. So there are many young people who, to whom this technology and digital media is not an issue at all. That they have abilities to control and live with that safely and responsibly. But then there are many who don't. Many communities and many schools are different. So we cannot think about one single solution that would be good for everyone. We need to find. We need to figure out what is going on in our own schools and communities and even families, and then move forward. So let me leave you with these 3 things. And this, as I said earlier, this is an invitation for all of you and all of us to think about this. How do we move from here to the situation where we could be more sure that young people can live healthy, safe, and responsible lives, and making all the positive benefits of the digital media and technology that they have. But we need to do something, and this something is not to ban these things, take them away, or switch off the Wi-Fi, or do something else, because we need to understand that most of these young people somehow feel that these devices, this technology is part of them, that is part of their who they are, and doing that, taking that away violently would be probably doing more harm than good. But one thing we can do is to use a better good evidence in conversations that we have when we are trying to fix these challenges, find out what to do, just by having conversations based on not a good data or beliefs or something else is not going to do any good. So that's why we need this type of research that we are doing. You need the data in your own communities and own countries that you can kind of do and use for these conversations. And the conversations here, I would underline that, is the only way that we can find sustainable solutions to these things. And this conversation should be inclusive. They should include parents, grandparents, the teachers, educators, community, and certainly young people themselves. The second thing, and this I just remember that this is not my solution. This is just my thoughts how to move from here to finding the solution. The second thing is that we need to probably help children more to self-regulate the use of their gadgets, so that they can find a healthy and healthier balance to live with these technologies and without them as well. And the self-regulation part is something that is now being tested and experimented and piloted in many places. Many schools are doing this, paying more attention to, how do we help young people to understand what these devices are and how to understand how to balance those things and how to live without these gadgets. There are some schools and communities where the parents, the whole community is exercising a digital diets during the weekends. Everybody switches off their gadgets and some other things. And the third one here is probably the most important thing is to role model what we are expecting our kids to do. And it's so common that we parents or teachers or adults, that we play with our gadgets and we are connected and addicted to them, and at the same time we are asking our kids to behave differently. It doesn't happen like this. It's like in any other thing in life that we need to be role models. We parents probably more than anybody else need to look at ourselves and our own behaviors, what we do, and then help young people to understand why we do the things as we do, and then try to do the same similar things. Extremely important thing. There's not going to be much change in this unless we adults and parents think again what we do, and that's where the change begins. So this is the end of the road here. Obviously, there's a lot of research, as I said, by colleagues and some others. Here are some articles if you want to take a more closer look at this research that I've been talking about here, and some of the articles that we have been publishing for the general public, including parents and community members here, about what is happening here, and there will be much more research certainly to come. Literature is very rich, and there's a lot of stuff going on there. So with this, I thank you so much for your attention. You can unlock your seatbelts, and let's get engaged into conversation. And I would like to also hear from, if there's anybody there listening who has already done some of these things, if you have kind of figured out a good way to teach young people and teach parents and ourselves, what to do with these issues, to stand up and share your views. And please remember that you have access to these slides right after this click here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much, Pasi, for that very stimulating, if not a little bit depressing at times. I was feeling quite worried myself listening to what you were saying there. A quick question from me before we move to some questions from our participants. Just overall, are you hopeful or are you worried for the children who are growing up digitally at the moment?
Am I worried?
Yeah, are you worried or are you hopeful for the future?
Well, overall, I'm very hopeful. I think that children, young people are our future because it's becoming obvious that we adults, we haven't been able to, figure out and solve these big problems. And obviously there are much bigger global problems than what I have been talking about here. And this is only the young people who can solve that. If we look at the some of the issues with the climate change or racial issues around the world right now, it's often led by, not just by young people, but young girls who are leading. So that's that's a positive thing. But of course, I'm a little bit worried when we saw this data, when I saw the Canadian data and some other kind of a health and well-being outcomes in this country and in Finland and some other places. What is happening to our young people in general, and but again, the power is in youngsters. What we need to do in our schools is to give them more agency to lead these change and lead these things and also learn from them. But I'm not worried about that. There are some alarming things that we need to kind of listen more carefully what the young people have to say.
We're going to move on to our first set of questions, and if I give you them in little groups, are you happy to receive them like that, and then you can come back? So first of all, would it be fair to say that this extra expenditure and trend in lowering standards that you identified aligns with the introduction and implementation of a foundation phase in Wales, where this topic-based outdoor approaches and the move away from children sitting at desks doing subject-specific lessons has been phased out? That's the first consideration. And then secondly, how can students' readiness to learn be increased in your opinion? They're from Ben and Evgenia.
Yeah, the question about the foundation phase in Wales, that's something I need to kind of pass over back to you. I don't know exactly, what it is and how much that entails in Wales's education budget. It may be that that's the case, that some of these expenditures are just kind of there's a natural reason for that. What you saw in this data is not just a kind of absolute spending of money, because everywhere we spend more money in education anywhere. But what you saw in my graph is basically broken down into per student spending. So it doesn't matter that much how many students or whether you have extra students there or not. It just illustrates probably more the overall spending. So the Wales data you need to look at nationally. I don't have that data. Maybe Alma or somebody can, as a researcher, can say something about that. But the students' readiness to learn, this is the whole point of this thing, and I think the starting point really is that we need to understand that there is an issue. So if you never thought about the question that why seems to be more difficult for young people to learn the similar ways than they used to before, then I think the first step is to try to understand why is that. What is kind of driving this declining readiness to learn. In our study, our conclusion, of course, the kind of a most obvious candidate for the explanation is that the time that young people spend with their gadgets and technology that has increased, and this is what we know that is away from something else, and it's often a way it has to decrease the time to sleep, time to read overall, time to exercise and play. And those are all obviously closely linked to students' readiness to learn. If you insist me to just say one thing that might be a good kind of a factor to enhance the overall readiness to learn in school and outside of the school, I would say that we all need to make sure that the children sleep enough and well enough every day. This is one of those issues that I'm mostly concerned about. Looking at, just take a look at the statistics of children's, adolescents, or teenagers, or even tweens daily sleep. that has declined during the last 10 years radically, and it's very clear that if you have a teenager who sleeps less than 6 hours every night, there's no way that this person can be ready to learn when she or he comes to school. But overall, my response is that let's try to understand what is behind this readiness to learn, what is happening, what may be driving this. Again, these are individual things. People are very different from one another. For some young people, less sleep might be quite enough compared to some others. But then I think we need to make sure that everybody, all the kids, get their kind of their basic needs and basic things fulfilled. If you ask this question from pediatrician, I'm sure that there's some medical doctors or experts there on the line listening to this webinar. You know, if you pose this question to pediatricians or medical doctors, their answers are probably very similar. Let's make sure that the young people sleep enough and move enough every day so that they are ready to learn. And this, of course, has not directly anything to do with the use of technology, but often, you know, the key question in this particular situation is to ask that what the children are not doing when they are spending 6 hours or sometimes 8-10 hours a day with the digital media and technology. And the answers are often exactly the same things, that they don't move, they don't sleep, they don't read, and some of those things must be behind this declining readiness to learn. Great question, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any student-friendly resources that you could share with us so that we could share with our own students to help them understand the risk of elevated screen time? And another question from Liz: of those countries that have had to move to remote learning as a result of the COVID crisis, which do you see as having adapted particularly well, and what lessons do you think that others could learn?
Yeah, the question about materials, we are just about, you know, working on, you know, based on this phase 1 and the phase 2 that is almost done here as well. So we don't have anything that we have done yet, materials for students or parents at home, which is a pity. That will be part of our phase 2 work, but we have something that we have prepared for schools, and everything that the Konski Institute we do here will be publicly available, but that has to wait for another probably 4 weeks or 6 weeks before we have this. But we're going to have a whole set of reading and activity materials for teachers in the schools, for parents and grandparents at home, and then young people themselves, particularly regarding this self-regulation thing. I know that there are some other universities here and elsewhere who have designed particular programs for teaching self-regulation for young people. And this is something that we might engage in a little bit later when we have the data coming from here. But at this point, we don't have this. The second question was about the COVID and some experiences and good practices of how the technology has been part of that, right?
Yeah, do you have some examples of where it's the transition to the remote learning because of COVID has worked well? Yeah, well, it's again, you know, this is one of those things that is just emerging. I know that many organizations and researchers like UNESCO and Education International, OECD, are currently collecting these practices. You know, what has happened during this transition. But we do have some kind of early lessons and early ideas. I know that Alma mentioned the Scotland
the Scottish government has done some work on the lessons from other countries and from their own schools as well, what has happened. I guess that some of the things that we can say at this point of time is that if you have an education system where the kind of authority has been more delegated to the schools or communities to decide, and then there's a trust to locally run these solutions or decide these things, that they probably seem to have an easier path in or journey through this pandemic and disruption than the others. We also have some evidence that the systems where teachers and schools have a stronger sense of being professionals, autonomous professionals, again, that can be trusted, that this navigation through this crisis have been smoother than some other places. And again, this self-regulation or self-directedness as a kind of a principle of teaching and learning or pedagogy in the schools is sometimes linked to more successful, or again, more smoother. I don't know if we know anything about success yet, but kind of a smoother way of responding to the crisis when the schools and particularly when the learners the students have learned how to regulate, how to take agency and ownership of their own learning, that things seem to be a little bit easier. I wrote a paper, an article a few months ago comparing a little bit Australia and Finland, that are very different education systems in all of these respects. And my conclusion was that the Finnish way of responding to the crisis has been quite different compared to Australia, simply because of this stronger sense of professionalism in the system, more trust in schools and teachers' ability to decide what to do and how to cope and deal with these remote learning things. And then that the students have been already during the last 10, 15 years systematically educated to self-direct, take the kind of a leadership of their own learning. And I think that these might be some of the themes in the forthcoming analysis and conclusions that will provide a much more in-depth response to this good question that was asked. But I would be careful at this stage to announce any particular better practices or better models of dealing with this type of disruption and pandemic than what I just said. But thanks for the question.
They're coming in thick and fast now. So there's a group here around about the increased correlation you said between the increased use and poorer well-being. Somebody's asking, would there if there's any research into the type of content accessed in relation to this correlation? For example, do those that spend 11 hours a day on social media report lower self-confidence compared to other content types? Do you want to take that one first, because there's quite a bit in there?
Yeah, I think this is a fairly probably correct conclusion. I must admit that I don't have a direct research or information about exactly this, but I do know that the research has been particularly looking at different types of contents or forms of use of digital media and technologies. I think the kind of a wisdom behind this question really is that we need to be very careful in talking about the screen time, and in our research we are less and less kind of using the screen time as a kind of a concept or the most important thing, because it doesn't include the what is happening, what this content is, as was the core of this question. Because it might be that somebody is spending 6 or 7 hours on screens, but doing something creative, something, creating content, doing something, it can be poetry, or it can be art or media or something like this. And that obviously is a very different way of using technology and media than hanging around in social media, watching YouTube videos or something like this, or gaming. The gaming is the other thing that they are. There's actually research showing that gaming can be very helpful in, for example, learning languages or communication or some other things, depending on what the content is. So that's why I try to be careful and still want to be careful with the just looking at this time. I think the more, as I said earlier, that the more important question than the actual minutes or hours that kids spend on screens is this: that what are they not doing when they are spending these hours, whatever they do with the screens or technology during the day. And this is where we begin to get the kind of important responses from ourselves and from the kids as well. And they often are linked to some other activities like reading books or going out and play or doing physical activities or sleeping. And then, of course, we can have a conversation which is a kind of a good balance in their lives to make sure that they can live healthy and happy lives.
Thanks for that. The next question sort of leads very neatly into what you just said there. So Wales is the first country in the world to legislate for children's play. Could embedding play work into scholastic life be a potential remedy against excessive digital use, and also a way of recovering from the trauma of the pandemic?
So the question is about, sorry, I missed the...
Could embedding play work into scholastic life be a potential remedy against excessive digital use, and also a way of recovering from the pandemic?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, of course. and the longer, thanks for this question. This is one of my favorite things. And this is what we often tell here in Australia when we talk about this growing up digital thing in the parents' evenings or in schools. And there's a question that, so what can we do? What is the kind of alternative? And particularly with the younger children, the playtime, and especially playtime at home provided by parents, if they just can't do that, and all the parents actually should be able to do that, is one of the best ways to not just offer children a more competitive alternative to do something, but then offer them something that at the same time can be so beneficial for their learning, for their physical health, for their mental health. And there's no question about it that now when this pandemic has caused kind of a physical disconnection for children from their friends and peers, social isolation, loneliness, and many other things, that there's no other form, and there's certainly no cheaper way to respond to this than make sure that children can play. It's a wonderful thing what the Welsh government has done to announce play as such an important thing. I know that the Scottish government is another one that has a very strong policy on active outdoor play. All the Nordic countries have a play is embedded in a very closely in not just in the education systems, but in the life of the societies as well. And that's exactly the way to move forward. So if you need a kind of a simple, concrete solution to start with this challenge that we have been talking about here, just make sure that the children have more time to play, and also that they have a kind of a right to that play, and it's protected by the governments like yours and the parents and adults like us. Great question. Thank you for that.
Thank you. To what extent do the negative effects that you describe have other factors that are challenging? For example, socioeconomic, history of mental health, family dysfunction, nutrition, neglect, those sorts of impacts. To what sort of extent do they present in those children who have those other challenges?
Yeah, that's the key question as well. And what this pandemic has done that it has overall made these inequalities that we have in our societies, in our education systems, more visible, and probably amplified some of them for sure. And we do know now that whereas 20 years ago the digital divide referred to the access that the different equity groups in the society everywhere in the world had to access the internet and everything that comes with it. Now the digital divide is really becoming an issue more, not so much about access anymore, but how the digital media and technologies are affecting different equity groups in a different way. Basically, most people have an access now to the similar services, and whether it's the entertainment or work or education, but it's treating young people differently. Part of the growing up digital research that especially we have done here in Australia, probably more than in the Canadian American study, is to look at exactly this issue, that how these phenomena that I was talking about are playing out in the, for example, different children, when we are looking at the disadvantaged students, for example. And it's a very clear, based on the teachers' perceptions here in Australia, is that the majority of teachers are saying that this readiness to learn and some of these other things are particularly issues with the more disadvantaged students, which may indicate that for a range of reasons, these children have less support and help and advice at home how to cope and deal with these challenges and difficulties when it comes to the media and digital devices. So this is in this whole field of research, as far as I'm aware. I know that there are some studies, but this equity and inequality thing is still something that we need to look at more carefully. For example, in the United States, and maybe in the UK as well, it's very clear that the more affluent children, according to some studies, spend significantly less time with their gadgets, smartphones, and technology compared to the rest, which may be again because of the lack of particular advice and support provided by the family context.
Thank you, Pasi. I've got a set of questions now which talks about how we can begin to educate families on the impact of the technology and how can we encourage them to have a healthy balance. Schools can help, but when they leave the gates, we can't stop them from that learning. Do you think it's possible for teachers to bond with pupils on a digital level? That's another one. Their perspective on the digital world moves so quickly. Can education ever catch up and build a good relationship between teachers and pupils? Couple for you there.
Yes, that's a difficult, that's a harder one. That's why I always we want to emphasize that we can only fix this challenge or solve this problem, if you wish, if we do it together collectively. So it has to include parents, it has to include teachers in the community, and it certainly has to engage young people themselves to have these conversations. And of course, there's again, depending on the teacher or adult or parents, there are huge differences in terms of how much we do really understand what the young people are doing with their gadgets and devices. I guess that most parents don't have a kind of a full understanding what their own children are engaged in, and particularly what type of relationship this gadget or technology and the world and the space that comes with it has formed with their own children. But that's exactly why we need these conversations. We need to be aware of you know, what's going on, what are we doing, you know, what is healthy and what is not. And, you know, there was an earlier question about how much we can trust and put our hope in young children. But, you know, every time when I see a school, and I've seen some of the schools here in Sydney area where the young people, where the students have decided that, you know, carrying smartphones with them to school every day and, you know, have them openly accessible all the time is not a good thing. And they have decided to, you know, put limits into that. In some schools, they're basically, the students decided that, you know, having a smartphone or gadget in a school is not a good idea. So they collectively decided to, you know, leave them home or leave them somewhere else. And that's a kind of a sign of a very powerful agency that young people can have. But I think that, you know, as an overall, I understand that something like this doesn't work in every school, and it probably shouldn't. But as a general direction forward, I think is to have more conversations about these things. You know, what do we know about how technology is shaping our lives, and, you know, including parents, and then have a collective conversation about, you know, what to do, how to move forward. Again, this doesn't work, as I said, that there's no single universal solution that would work everywhere, but in many communities this is something that works. I do quite a bit of work here with the communities of parents and teachers and kids here in Sydney related to this, and it's always a positive experience when we have a conversation, and especially if the conversation is based on facts. It doesn't make much sense to, you know, have parents and kids and teachers to talk about something that they don't know, that there's no data or evidence or research behind that. So these conversations have to be based on some valid data or information. Otherwise, it doesn't lead anywhere. But I have a full confidence that the more we know about these things and more we understand what is happening, the more likely we are, you know, finding a solution or something simple for ourselves that will be helpful.
Thank you. I think we're just moving on to the last set that we can get in. I think if we'll do as many as we can. There's some questions around whether or not you think it's realistic or valid to continue to assess learners in Wales and England through the use of handwritten pen and paper exams, formal examinations, given their use of screens and digital media in their everyday life. There's a good point here. Devices and software use sophisticated techniques and psychological reward methods to keep the attention of pupils. For example, in the gamification, do you think that education is behind the curve here? And given the extent of the problem highlighted by the research, do you think that schools and education departments or governments should be employing individuals and creating roles for overseeing digital health and well-being?
Can you repeat the last one? I was just typing here.
Sorry. Given the extent of the problem that you've highlighted by the research, do you think that schools, education departments and governments should be employing individuals creating roles for overseeing and facilitating digital health and well-being?
Yeah, that's a good one. Let me start with the last one. You know, it might be actually a good idea. It depends on the system a little bit, how the systems are run. But you know, I think it's probably first thing to do before that is to make sure, and I'm quite sure that the Welsh government, being one of the advanced education leaders in the world, already has a kind of a plan or strategy for the digital digital wellness is becoming a term that is more often used now, or digital well-being of young people, to make sure that all the schools and communities have enough information and awareness of these things. It might be a good idea that that there would be a person or expert or experts in the governments to make sure that these digital wellness and well-being things will be making a difference in the schools and communities. But I still think that the danger in this type of approach, of course, is to try to implement a one size fits all approaches into schools and communities. And as you have probably heard during this last hour, that's not always the best thing to do. That what works in one community, one school, one individual doesn't necessarily be good for somebody else. So if you do that, it has to be done in a kind of a mindful way. Then there was a question about if education is behind the curve when it comes to the student engagement and compared to technology and gaming, of course. Again, it depends on what type of school or schooling or education we are looking at. But I think overall it's becoming more and more challenging in this world of this very digital world, where students can find so many attractive and interesting and inspiring things through their gadgets to make schooling equally inspiring for young people who think like this. So I think it's probably fair to say that education is a little bit behind the curve in many places. But again, I'm just like here in Australia, in Wales, there are very different types of schools. There are some schools that are doing really advanced things in this respect. And then we have a very traditional schools, just like we have here. So it's a kind of a sensitive issue to look at this in general. But I think that what we are learning already now in this pandemic is the importance of the students' engagement, their kind of intrinsic interest and motivation to learn, that in many cases, in many schools, is not at the level that it should be. And I think that as it has happened here in Australia, that many parents have actually now understood much better that, how many things there are in the schools that their own kids need to learn that has very little to do with anything in their real lives, or let alone this pandemic, that many kids have been learning things remotely from home as if no pandemic has ever happened, and the whole world has changed around young people, and they probably in many places should have been learning much more about this change, what is this new world and what is this new pandemic, and what does it do to our societies and work and many other things. So I accept that it's probably fair to say that education is a little bit behind the curve in general, and that we need to catch up and learn how to do these things. The first question was about assessing, if I remember correctly, assessing students using pens and papers when they are spending so much time in learning with their gadgets. You may call me names, but somehow I have this funny opinion that using pen and a paper, making notes and writing letters to your grandparents or your loved ones by hand, longhand, or answering the exam or test papers whenever you do those using pen and paper is important. And it's probably even more important to realize that inability to do so in the future can be a huge danger for many young people. So I have nothing against the adaptive assessments doing by kind of online assessment protocols sometimes, but I would also love to see, I have 2 young children here in school, and if this question came to me from the school or from the Department of Education, I would definitely say that I would love to see my own boys learn to use the pen and paper, including answering the the exam and test papers, writing essays using pen and paper, and writing letters to their grandparents for sure. And I know that this is not just a black and white issue, but that's something I would love to see. But you know, all these questions that you've been asking are just a fabulous, shows a lot of interest and commitment to this issue. And I wish you all the best with these questions and your work with your communities and families to make sure that our children have a healthy and happier lives ahead of them.
Thank you so much. It's been an extremely thought-provoking presentation this evening, and it definitely merits further discussion and consideration for us here in Wales. It's been an absolute privilege listening to you and learning from you this evening, and we look forward to welcoming you in person, hopefully, once the conditions allow. So thank you ever so much. Huge amount of questions. I apologise to our joinees this evening for not being able to get through every one of them. We will share them with you. There's a recording of tonight's event and it will be made available on our website in the next few days. The slides will be available to you as well. So please look out at ewc.wales for those. We've put on a reflection template for your professional learning passport on tonight's event, and you'll see there that you'll be able to capture and reflect upon what we've heard and discussed this evening. Encourage you to work towards using that. There's one question and comment that's been liked the most, and therefore there's been a request for it to be shared, so I thought it might be quite nice for us to finish on this evening. I'm an older teacher now, I'm 47. I'm a technology advocate, but I think the worries about digital use in education comes from those afraid of change or not being as digitally literate as their teaching peers. The use of digital devices is only going to grow as they get smaller, quicker, and have increased responsiveness. AI will add a further dimension. Society changes, so too must the educational landscape. For me, the best way to have a rest from screens is to increase nature-based education, where all forms of non-organic technology are not used. The benefits of learning in nature and the associated well-being effects are well documented. And I think that rounds all messages that we've had from you this evening, Pasi, up very, very nicely for us. So I'd just like to thank you all for your attendance today. Thank you once again for the excellent presentation and the much thought-provoking questions that you've raised in our minds this evening. I wish you all well. Thank you, everyone. Good evening.
Thank you.